happy to be able to introduce one of the leaders in the field of math education and mathematics education, and probably a learning scientist, even if she doesn't identify that way. So, I certainly think we have plenty of learning sciences to talk about.
So thank you. It's an honor to be here, and also to see, you know, Cindy's new playground and meet some of her, you know, playmates. It's just been fantastic. And had a great tour of the university yesterday. Beautiful campus and perfect weather. Beautiful fall. Couldn't be better. So it's really a pleasure. And I would tell some of you who are still students here that, you know, your big event is when you defend your dissertation, and it makes a lot of students nervous. But I will tell you, enjoy it, because you have a really interested group paying attention, and you have a long time to talk about your work. And you don't always have a long time to talk about your work. So opportunities like this for me to talk about my work is analogous to talking about your children. It's analogous to, you know, talking about your grandchildren in some cases. You want to talk about it, just need the audience to want to hear about it. So, so it really is a pleasure to be here. This work that I'm going to talk about, I tried to begin situating it to the apprenticeship group a little earlier, and how I came to be doing this over the years. And it really comes about from my own background as a teacher. And I had considerable experience teaching before I came to the university and did my degree. And that particular teaching, I was a mathematics teacher in 3 different high schools, junior high and colleges, 2 of them, one in Georgia, one in New Jersey, mathematics. And of course, I always felt the frustration is, why aren't they even engaging? Why aren't they even trying? This is not beyond them. They could do these things. Why are not they willing? This is like this wall of, aren't you going to tell me what to do? You know, what am I going to be tested on? What do I have to know? And you know that that doesn't work. That's soon forgotten. So the motivation for me and the research that I had been doing with my colleagues, and I also want to point out that when I started my career, my students were my colleagues. I was really, I came to the university at Rutgers, the 2 senior professors left, and there I was, and my students became my colleagues. And that was a wonderful thing, because they brought me into their classrooms, and I had a chance to, you know, work with them side by side, and as they explored alternative ways, very much interested in how students build mathematical understanding. That was sort of the early motivation. So I want to situate my background with respect to that, and also make it very clear that none of this work could have been done, the massive amount of work that's gone on over the years, without my colleague students. I have chaired over 60 doctoral dissertations, and I'm chairing currently another dozen. And the doctoral work is the detail. The doctoral work is the scut work. It's the hours that you put into learning about the details. And I want you to realize that that's also a great resource. Don't ignore that. And the good news is, for what I'm going to be talking about, you don't have to believe what you're reading. You don't have to believe what you're reading. But if you see it, right, if you see what's going on, if you look at the actual videos and look at the engagement, maybe, you know, you will believe, or maybe you will even add greater depth or greater understanding or great other perspectives to what you're seeing. So the theme of this is believing is seeing, and my work now has moved from studying really how children develop mathematical ideas and ways of reasoning, longitudinal studies, many, many years, to say, what do we do with all this knowledge? We have evidence. We know what students can do. They can do amazing things. And those of you who are parents know that, right? You know that children can do amazing things. You're teachers. You know they can. But how do you help make that knowledge accessible to practicing teachers who only know a certain model of teaching? You know, I tell you, you practice, I give you a test, we go through this iteration. And it's very personal for me. I have 3 grandchildren. And then when you want to engage my oldest, who is 8 tomorrow, big day tomorrow, she's 8, big day on a lot of counts. And she who was building patterns and towers and whatever, is in school now and doesn't want to talk math. She freezes. What's going on? What's going on in school for a young child who likes to do puzzles and likes to interact, already is her own concept, is really, her own self-identity, her own sense of what she can do. So there's a real mission here for everybody here, that there's a lot of work to be done. And you are the generation, you those who are students here, you're the ones who have to do that work. And you have now, the legacy that we are leaving you, those of us who are sort of moving into doing and sharing our knowledge, right, Peter? What we're doing is we're leaving you with tools, we're leaving you with resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so if none of that is clear as we move along, make sure you ask me, and we'll have a chance to talk with you all later. So we're talking about beliefs. And we're talking in this case about beliefs because there's been research done on beliefs, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the point here is I want to tell you, these are the things I hope I can touch on in the little time I have. I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into this work, right? I want to tell you a little bit about the design research we've done. I want to tell you a lot about our resources in our video Mosaic Collaborative repository. And whatever I don't tell you, Cindy can follow through and tell you about also. She's one of the builders of that with us at Rutgers. I want you all to sign up to use our analytic tool and join our open source worldwide network. It's free, it's open source. You can play with it, you can have a lot of fun with it, and I'm hoping that after the talk, you're all going to apply to have an account and use it for whatever reason you want to, because of the open source access and the new resources that are available to you. So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish. I'll see how much of this I can do. But we go way back to the National Research Council, very old document, goes way back. We talked about reasoning, we talked about competence, we talked about conceptual understanding, we talk about productive disposition, right, this inclination to see mathematics as sensible, useful, worthwhile, a belief in the diligence of one's efforts. I still believe in all those things, don't you? Don't you want that for all of your students? Sure you do. You want it for yourself as well, right? I still believe in this. You know where I'm coming from in this, right? You also must know, if you're coming to this talk, how my lifetime work has been around videos. And Cindy shared, used to come to my home, and my husband created all these, just lots and hundreds of videos collecting over the years. We have 4,500 hours of videos, and we'll talk about that later. And I've been very, very much interested in how other people use videos in a variety of ways to do work. And I've named just a few of them here, but some of you know this work, and there's some wonderful publications about, these after school work with teachers and video clubs and these different ways. But video is powerful. It's here. We know it's useful. And we don't have to spend a lot of time about that. We accept that, right? Video is useful. We use it a lot of ways. And particularly for those folks, who want to learn about teaching, have not yet been in the classroom, it would be nice for them to see images of things other than a very traditional kind of approach to teaching. And so those images, you can at least get them interested in whatever by showing them videos of what it might look like if it weren't like what they might be seeing. And we can't always control what they see, right? I mean, we don't have that science down well enough. We hit or miss. Your placement may be wonderful in your teaching experience, but it may not be so wonderful. And that's just sometimes the way the cookie crumbles, they say, something like that. So a little bit of work has been done about mathematical reasoning and beliefs. And some of this has been written about, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about that. But when we started this project, Cindy and I and other colleagues, we just, Sharon Derry, we remember the meeting we had, we just thought that we ought to look at beliefs. And we ought to look at what folks' beliefs are about what teaching looks like, effective teaching, what students can do, what teachers can do, before we begin our project, and see if anything of that changes. We actually developed the beliefs inventory ourselves. And we came up originally with about 36 items. We focused on a subset of 22 of those items because things that were not relevant, such as using a calculator or something which we weren't dealing with, we ended up not using. But we used that subset and even focused more. My husband back there did stats for us, but even on how 11 of these subsets become really, really important predictors in certain ways. So we did look at beliefs. Now, the way to think about this for now, how many of you know about the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Standards? How many of you heard about that? Why are you just putting your hand like this? Come on. So it looks like the majority of you have, and let's assume those of you who haven't, even if that's not your field, you may be parents someday or whatever, you might want to take a look. They're around, right? But the point is, there's a certain perspective, right, about learning and teaching that these standards represent, a certain perspective. And our beliefs inventory that we created, and we studied for liability and so forth, is based upon whether or not your beliefs are consistent with those standards or not. Or some people were undecided. And that's when you get to the fancy analysis that we may have time to go into or not. But you say, yeah, I do believe that all students, given certain opportunities, can build mathematical understanding. But you may say, well, I'm not sure about that. Maybe students who have learning disabilities can't. I'm not sure I believe that. Or, I don't believe that at all. That's just a ridiculous statement. All kids possibly can't. So you have people who have these firm beliefs. You have people who say, I'm not sure, and there's some people, who say absolutely not. So this is how we looked at the beliefs inventory. And so if you can think about that. And I have some items to show you if you're interested later. So we were interested in the notion of what do beliefs have to do with a teacher's learning how to recognize student reasoning. And we're very explicit about the kind of reasoning, because our earlier research is a paper that was published in JRME in 1996. I shouldn't talk about JRME because I'm edit JMB, and that was a plug for JRME. It was not intended. But it is in JRME in 1996 by myself and my doctoral student, postdoc at that time, Amy Martino, where in our study about how students develop mathematical ideas, we found that in a very natural way, they come up with arguments that are proof-like. Now, I'm not claiming they're proofs, because they're for certain cases. You see what I'm saying? They're not generalizations. But they're proof-like. They take the form of proof. And we'll talk about that later. Like they might look at an argument by cases. They might look at an argument by contradiction, right? They might look at an inductive reasoning or analogical. But they do this in a natural way. If you push them, to be able to justify what they've done in their problems that they've worked on, in a very natural way, they come up with these kinds of arguments. That was amazing. That was really amazing. And that was really important because that was really part of, that came up with the standards coming out, that was cited as one important finding. And that finding had us, in our research, in our NSF grant, shift our attention to look very explicitly at student solution to problems, to look at the structure of their solutions to see if they were, quote, proof-like. Does that make sense? Now, those people who are trained to be math teachers aren't trained to do that. They're not. They don't think about that. They look at a student's solution and the reasoning, but they don't look at that structure of that solution and the form of that reasoning. So here was an opportunity. The question is, can they do that in a natural way? Before some can, some can't. Most can't, right? Could they learn to do that, right? And learning to do that, does that have something to do with what you think kids can do? Right? Is it related in any way to your beliefs? Or if your beliefs change, do you tend, with that change, to notice more? Now, I don't know, which came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't want to get into that argument. We're looking at relationships and what we've discovered, and we can continue to look and look more deeply, but that's what this talk is about. Fair enough? So we know that And we've published papers on how teachers could recognize students' reasoning or not, but this is the paper we haven't really written yet, that's in process. So you're going to get an early look at some of the presentations we've made. We're going to work on that paper next, we think, right? Cindy, Jim, right? But this is the big finding of our 5-year research, 5-year grant that I think is amazing, that beliefs are important if you're trying to change what teachers notice on video. And Cindy made a comment in the apprenticeship group earlier that I think is very appropriate here if you think about it. She talked about people notice different things when they look at video, right? And there's research to support that. And I know we show some video clips and they'll say, she's so bossy, the little girl, you know the video I'm talking about. And they're not looking at her reasoning. They're looking at, she's really bossy because she's insisting on showing her reasoning. Well, is that bad? That someone wants to show their reasoning, right, and pushing to show their own ideas? And if she's female, isn't that good? Or male, or doesn't matter, right? It's a good thing, right? But people will look at the affect, she's bossy. You know, that's kind of disappointing. Look more, look at what she's doing, right? Look at her argument. Focus on that. What are you going to do with that in her learning as she continues to develop her mathematical understanding? So, you probably hear much about what we call cyber-enabled research. I talked about our major video collection. We followed the same students from grade 1 through elementary school, through high school, and some of them beyond high school. We brought them back for varieties. This is all NSF-funded research. That was a cohort group, and I talked a little bit about that in the apprenticeship group. We call this the Longitudinal Study. Now, this is really kind of interesting thing to keep in mind when you think about this longitudinal study. We went into a working class district where even their very best students, when they went to high school, were barely making C's. We visited the classrooms to see what teachers were doing, and if they taught math, half an hour, if they taught it, it was telling and showing. With one exception, a first grade teacher had manipulatives, but the kids didn't touch them. The teacher demonstrated. You have to think it's a long time ago, but this was what was happening in that particular school. The principal, whom I thought, and this is written about in the book Counting and Combinatorics, you know, it's published, and the background of the study is all in there for that particular strand. So, you know, you can take a look at that, the Springer book. But I want to make the point that the principal there, who was a teacher in that school, had a vision, and he said the kids can do more. They should be doing better. It's the teaching, something's wrong here. It's the conditions for the teaching. And so when he invited us in to work with the teachers, and that's a whole other story, and then the deal was, you know, here I am, a young assistant professor, I have to worry about things like tenure. Does anyone relate to that in this room? I don't know. You have to worry about things like that. I said, well, yeah, we could do this, and I could bring my grad students, but we have to do research. And could you commit for us to follow some students and over the years to make us a research project? And he committed for the first 8 years for us to do this. And he met his commitment. There are some papers written about that. When the kids went to high school, they, for the first time in history in New Jersey, the district actually became part of a larger district, and so some of the school was closed, and the people were all up in arms, and they rallied for a year to get the school reopened. But some of the students we lost because they went to parochial schools or private schools or public, but came back. And the students who came back in our longitudinal study, they volunteered their time to continue in the study after school. Now, you're talking about high school students who play sports and do a variety of things, would come after school and work on mathematics, and their coaches out there saying, you have to come and play, you have to come and play, calling them out. I mean, it was a scene to behold, but it's true, and it's absolutely amazing. So we were able, under those conditions, to follow the students through high school, and then after that, we were bringing the students back. Why? Because they were doctoral dissertations. My doctoral students were interested, and so when they did calculus, what did they remember? How would they teach? If they had to teach the fundamental theorem of calculus, how would they do it? Now, you ask them how they do that. That became a research project of Ralph Mantosi, for example. So we brought them back as juniors. They weren't math majors, and they were put in the role of a teacher. He kept all of their earlier work in the book and said, how would you teach this? Very good dissertation, by the way. So we followed them even beyond when they went out of school. We brought them together. We videotape. So lots of data that's not on the repository we have. So I just want to tell you, major video, publicly accessible videos, even what's not on the repository is publicly accessible. We have permission to share this, use the names of the students in publication, use their images. Because we did it so long ago, no rules were in place. And we had IRB approval. It won't happen now, right? Never, ever happen again. But we're lucky, and we renew our IRB every year. Very important, don't let that IRB not get reviewed. Okay, so everything we've done is based upon student reasoning. And longitudinal, extensive video, and a very small portion is here on our repository, which is part of our last cyber learning grant, which is 400 hours, but also a wonderful new tool that some of you know about, which our digital librarian called the VMC, Video Mosaic Collaborative Analytic. It gets confusing about analytics, but it's the VMC Analytic. What it really is, it's an editing tool. So that you can go to the repository. You can even go for full videos now that we can do things quickly and fast, even videos that are not on the repository, and you could write your own story. You can create your own narrative. And if you haven't done that already, you really need to learn how to do that. I'm sure Cindy will give you a talk on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that if I have time. Okay? And I also want to talk about some case studies of the bigger thing I'm talking about that were doctoral and are doctoral student dissertations right now. So there's a lot of connections here. We okay so far? Okay. So I wanted to say something that our longitudinal study became cross-sectional because when NSF gave us money, we had submitted a second research grant to work with urban schools, and they said, why aren't you working with suburban? And we thought, well, you know, why do you think we should work with suburban? And then they said, because they'll think they don't need this. And they do. And they gave us more money if we would also include suburban. So we had working class, we had urban, and we had suburban school as part of the cross-sectional part of our longitudinal study. We dealt with several content strands. We started with counting, because we started with first graders, and we had a whole combinatoric strand. We had probability. We had algebra, early algebra, which we started working, children were working in grade 6 with algebra. And then we had pre-calculus and calculus. So those were the various strands, and they crossed over in some respects of what we've done. I'm going to talk a little bit about this repository because everything that's in the repository has a transcript. You don't know how lucky you are to get the transcript to go with the video, guys. You have the transcript. You also have the related work. If there's work, and sometimes there are notes, we have every task that we've done there in terms of task strands. So you have a collection of all the tasks we created in our intervention over time in all of these areas. I mean, there's a lot there. And it has an interesting search engine that hopefully I'll have time to show you. And then our new tool of a few years, this VMC Analytic, which is very exciting to me because our book that's coming out, hopefully the beginning of next year, every chapter has with it accompanying at least 1 or 2 analytics. So you can read your chapter, but you just click and you can get to see the video that goes with it. So you don't have to believe it, right? You could see it and then you could, if you want, believe it. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have been investigating recently, we're interested in how teachers looking at video can learn to identify student reasoning, okay? And we're interested in their beliefs, I said that earlier, and about learning and teaching, and we're looking at that relationship. We had in our study, NSF-funded study, we had different cohorts participating, okay? Now those of you who are doing research on a large scale with an NSF grant know that that is not easy, you know, to get these groups and these cohorts. So So one of the cohorts was actually a class that I was responsible for teaching since I've come to Rutgers, which is usually the first course our graduate students take, whether you're a PhD, whether you're EDD, whether you're a master's, whatever, or you could even take it as a non-matric. And that became the content of Robert Sigley's doctoral dissertation over a 5-year iteration. So that would be one example. Then we have the pre-service elementary sections. That would be another pre-service university courses. Okay. Then you would have your pre-service secondary sections, you know, and so these sections vary in how many students. Pre-service secondary enrollment's less. I don't know if it's true here, but you have fewer students in a secondary than you tend to have in an elementary at our university. So we would do different iterations. And then we had created a course with a partnership with another grant that was administered by our mathematics department, where they asked us to develop a course for them on reasoning, teachers learning to recognize student reasoning. And we developed this modified lesson study course based upon the same kinds of nature of the interventions we did in our regular courses, with one exception. In the course, these teachers had a chance to try out the tasks with their own students. I mean, they were practicing teachers, why not, right? We couldn't do that with our regular students in our regular courses. Some of them taught, some of them didn't, right? Some of them were pre-service and didn't have access. So we had in these cohorts of this particular, what they call the PEMS research, which was a very, very exciting project by our math department. It ran for several years, where the teachers were recruited in different cohorts from districts all over our state. And they got credit for all but 3 courses towards a master's degree. They got it paid for. And then they could apply then to the schools to get a master's degree, and usually the school paid for the rest of it. So just think, a free master's degree. An opportunity. And these courses were held actually in clusters around regions in the state, usually 3 school districts, and they varied where they met, so it was like on their sites. So that was a difference. But it was still the course, and still the model was the same, because that was a question that Andy asked earlier. The model was the same, except the one opportunity that they had to go try things in their own classrooms and come back and talk, bring samples of their students' work, discuss their students' work. We gave samples of students' work. They all looked at the same videos, right? And pretty much the sequence of activities were the same. Might have been some minor differences, but I don't think, I'd say minor. One would choose one problem that was isomorphic to another. You know, the instructor could make those choices. So what was the cycle of activities? We always started by working on some problem tasks, okay? And the teachers worked on those tasks, and they talked about them, they shared their solutions, etc., and they talked about them, and they had to justify them. They were pushed to justify their solutions and build models. Then after they did that, you know, they talked about them on the web, on online discussion forums. And then after that, they were assigned videos to observe students working on exactly the same problems. And then they talked about how the students solved the problems. And after that, they had to do an implementation in their own classroom. We asked for volunteers in the beginning. The facilitator instructor was there to assure them that they gave the tasks. They didn't do any teaching, you know, they didn't tell them what to do, they just distributed the tasks and asked the students to explain their solutions. So to keep, someone talked about validity in the other group, to keep the validity of the project, that the teacher's not telling you what to do. Because you don't know, right, when you're not there. To discuss the students' justifications and reasoning. So all in all, we had 126 teachers that we call experimental from these different groups, and we had one group of comparison teachers that they looked at videos but not our videos. They had a course on, a comparable course on learning to teach, but it was not our tasks. So it was really a comparison. I don't want to call them controlled, but it was a comparison group, and there were two groups of those, and that was a total of 50. So this would be the distribution of the of our population from the public and school districts in our study. So we're interested in reasoning, and so we used a particular video for the teachers to study, and it was sort of an open-ended thing where we asked them described what students were doing in their justifications and reasoning, and we gave the same as a post video. And we were interested in what arguments they saw. These were fourth graders. So if you know the video, we call it affectionately the Gang of Four. Peter, you might be interested that the first time the Gang of Four was shown is when the late Robert B. Davis was at a retirement dinner for Andy Gleason at Harvard, and he was invited to speak. And we had just made the video, and Bob said nothing, but he took it with him and he showed it, and he remember Chloe says they loved it. These were the fourth graders actually supporting their solutions to a convincing argument. We've written about this if you want the reference. But in this little short video, 10, 12 minutes, we see an argument by contradiction, we see an argument by cases, we see an inductive argument. All of that in that short. Now what did the teachers see? That's the question. And we see the students doing this really actually by using their own symbolic representations. Prior to that, they'd worked on the problem building physical models. And they're trying to convince each other, and I was the interviewer of the small group about their solution to the problem. You should look at that. It's a wonderful, one of my favorites video. We call it the Gang of Four. And that was our pre-post video that we used for the study. And I talked a little bit about the belief inventory. So, it was all right to collect that open-ended data, but let me tell you, talking about scoring it and getting reliability for it, I mean, that's the hard part of a research grant. That was really hard, but we did. We scored blindly. We had a rubric that we developed. We had 6 reviewers and pairs, and we ended up with an inter-rater reliability that was 90% or greater, and that was hard work, and I tell you, hard work. And we worked on those argument types for this. So sometimes we'd have people recognizing a part of an argument, but not the whole argument. So we were interested from the beginning what they noticed to what they noticed in addition to that after our intervention. So we gave a talk at AERA about this, and my husband gave a talk to my graduate students that's on YouTube. I'm going to skip some of the details of the analysis because I will tell you it gets a little complicated because we have a new statistic here. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the new statistic. You can talk to Jim later about the new statistic, but we're going to talk about that. A lot of belief studies, people have students get responses on a Likert scale, and what do? They take an average. Well, this is not really appropriate. You know, if I'm interested in your beliefs, I want to know where you were on that scale now and where you're going to be later. I want to know you. I want to know how your beliefs changed and how it went from your initial beliefs to later. I don't want an average of what you did and what you did. And anyway, that data is attribute data, and it should not really be averaged anyway, but people average it. So we're talking about really tracking beliefs of each person very, very carefully, looking at the change of each person's beliefs. That's a different kind of, and it's a very, very detailed, time-consuming analysis. Okay? So bear that in mind. These are some findings. The secondary and the in-service middle experimental groups showed significantly higher growth in their reasoning. Significantly higher, it's 0.01, right? The pre-service elementary teachers didn't. It's interesting, isn't it? And overall, 37.5% of the experimental teachers showed growth in reasoning in comparison to 4% of the comparison group. Now, when there was no difference in the different groups, then we would pull them together. That's where that number comes from. Now think about this. This is our beliefs kind of instrument here, but we scored it as on each item, each of those 22 items, whether or not it was consistent with the standards, whether or not you were undecided, or whether or not it was inconsistent, okay? And these would be some example items. I gave you an example. One, if students learn math concepts before they learn the procedures, they are more likely to understand the concepts. What do you think about that? Should you learn the procedure first? Should you learn the concept? You like that, right? Manipulative should only be used with students who don't learn from the textbook. Learners can solve problems in novel ways before being taught to solve such problems. Now, that's interesting, because I would expect that you all believe that, right? Of course they can. You know, they can do it. Just give them a chance, right? And watch and observe what they do. Young children must master facts before starting to solve problems. That's a tricky one, right? You know what parents think about that, right? And only the most talented students can learn math with understanding. So you can get a sense of these. And then we had also views on teaching, right? So another question, what evidence is there of teachers changing beliefs in direction consistent with the standards? Pre-service elementary, pre-service secondary, and in-service middle all exhibited growth in beliefs that are consistent with the standards. That's just looking at beliefs alone. They all exhibited growth. On the average, 66% of the experimental teachers' post-assessment beliefs were standards consistent, compared with 55% on the pre-assessment, representing a growth of 10.9%. It's a growth, right? It's not moving mountains, but it's a growth. All of them showed significant growth in beliefs after the intervention. And for pre-service secondary and in-service middle experimental teachers, significantly higher growth in reasoning, in contrast to the comparison group, who didn't grow at all. We would expect that. They didn't have the knowledge before, it wasn't part of the intervention, why would they have it afterwards, right? So this is something that can be taught. That's good, isn't it? It's the good news. If it's something that can be taught, is the good news. Now, how are pre and post teachers related to their growth in recognizing student reasoning from video? I have a whole bunch of slides here, but I don't think I'm going to have time to show them to you. But I'm going to tell you what is really important here. So I have a certain ability to notice reasoning before the intervention, right? And you may all differ. You may all pick up different things, right? And each of you may have beliefs. Now, it's interesting that before the intervention, if your beliefs happen to be consistent with standards, you were noticing more. You know, not everybody who comes in, you know, needs to be persuaded that these standards beliefs are reasonable. People come with them, right? Many of you have these beliefs as well. And they tend to notice. But more importantly, those, and if they do, they pretty much stay the same. But those whose beliefs are not consistent with standards, whose beliefs change to be consistent with standards, whose reasoning is not noticing much, they tend to increase their reasoning. That's the big finding. In other words, if your beliefs are consistent with reasoning, even at the beginning, or as a result of the intervention, you tend to notice more. But it's not quite that simple, because there are different groups of noticing, and that's the more complexity of it. It's never quite that simple. And there were belief transition statistics that were, this is not, again, we reported on it. I want to take the time to show you this, but it has to do with measures of the percentage of standards consistent beliefs that remain standard consistent after the intervention, the measures of the percentage of undecided that remained, the measures of the percentage of standards of inconsistent that remained inconsistent, and you have to calculate these threshold values. I had a graph that I'm not going to show you that, but if you're interested, we can show you later today. And what's really important here, that we found big differences from elementary pre-service teachers and secondary pre-service and middle school teachers, is that they have a much larger collection of views that are inconsistent with standards. Now that suggests there's a lot of work to be done here. I don't know how many of you work with elementary school teachers in this room. Okay, so you have your work to be done, right? I mean, this is really serious. So anyway, I don't want to go into this. But secondary pre-service teachers, I'm not going to talk about the tiers, so I'm going to skip all this. But maybe I can go to the conclusions to see that experimental teachers had growth on the post-assessment. It was 4% on the comparison group, and 37.5% on the experimental. 55% of the experimental teachers reported pre-beliefs consistent with standards, and the statistic grew to 66%. I don't have the tables here, I took them out. Experimental teachers, these are different categories of reasoning, but they had the higher transition rate, 64 compared to 21, and versus 3.5% on the reasoning task. So the reasoning task growth rate is comparable for the 3 experimental teacher groups when you look at them across these particular transition groups, and that gets to be a little complicated. But what's important, the movement of each teacher was traced. I said that earlier, we didn't look on average. The potential impact of teacher belief movement to growth and recognized student reasoning. A teacher's reasoning growth rate was found to be independent of the group, being pre or in-service teacher, which I found interesting. I didn't expect that. Teacher beliefs aligned with the standards were strong predictors of success in recognizing student reasoning for all teacher groups. That's the really big one here. And that's a particular relationship. So what are the implications of this? Well, maybe we think significant growth in middle school experimental teachers can be explained partly by the modified lesson study intervention, where they had a chance really to work with their own students. I mean, we would expect that would matter. We also know that teachers can learn to recognize student reasoning. The beliefs are associated with the growth, and that we should look at this a little bit more, in other studies. We should kind of take a look at this, particularly with this kind of analysis. So my own intuition about this, the videos were important. Looking at the videos were important. Trying it in your classroom is very important. We did a big study. Someone should do a big grant, Cindy, where now we have lots and lots of teachers now, but they have to do it in their classroom, and use the same model, but you got to do it on a larger scale, right? This is a much smaller scale study. It's a big one, right? It takes a lot of, a lot of soldiers to do this, a lot of worker bees, right? But you have the videos to show, you have the tasks to show, right? You just need to get them to do this in their classroom. The analysis of this is kind of encouraging because it says, look, we found a difference. The difference was significant. It's kind of aligned to beliefs. But, what really happened to do this? I could say I think the videos were important, but maybe there's more to it than this. So I want to talk briefly about the Indepth Studies. I'm not going to talk about the one that Robert Sigley did, but I want to use as an example one of them, of a student who defended her dissertation 2 weeks ago. Cindy knows of another one. She was on the committee that was for maybe April or March defense. But these students together developed their frameworks, developed their coding scheme, developed their research questions, etc. But they all worked independently, studying different cohort groups with Facilitator. Do you follow me? Now, think about what makes this a dissertation. Well, they videotaped everything. Now think about that. They were in there, they videotaped teachers working on the problems, they videotaped, the instructor, they also looked at the instructor, I'm going to talk about the framework, the instructor questioning, the instructor input, etc. They collected all the student work, they had privy to have access to all the online discussion. They had small groups, but the case study of a cohort with 8 to 10 teachers, they were able to develop a story about each teacher. And they were able to trace in detail, when there were changes, sort of the evolution of those. So it becomes really a story of that change. You see, not just you have something here and there's a change here and you don't know, like it's a black box, what goes on in the middle. Are you following? So I'm just going to give you a little window into this. I think this is important. So these qualitative case studies, of which I've chosen one, and I emailed Phyllis, and she's so excited I'm going to talk about her study. So if you want to know more about it, I'll give you her contact, and you can get a copy of her dissertation. It's over 1,000 pages, but you can have a copy. So this is the modified lesson course on reasoning. And I said before, they have different intervention models, but we're talking now about the 3 doctoral students who did the modified lesson study, which has 5 cycles. And it was actually in the school districts. They met actually at the schools in those locations. And what did the teachers do? They did problem solving, they did video study, they had related readings. We always had readings if there was something published about it. They had online discussion, they had classroom implementation. And within each of these cycles, we had phases, right? So that's what they called them, phases. Teachers always started by working on the same tasks the kids worked on. They read the research, they watched the videos of the same tasks, they implemented it in their classrooms. They had to come back with samples of their own student work, interpret something that they found surprising, something interesting, something confusing. So they brought these in and they talked about them and shared them. And a lot of this was also videotaped or online discussion. In terms of the facilitator instructor, somebody asked me the question also in the last session, what that role was. Well, I like to take a quote from Bob Davis in one of his papers where he talks about the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. I mean, that's sort of the philosophic approach and the perspective of what we wanted our facilitators to be, right? Guide on the side. You're not supposed to be up there talking and telling and showing. You're supposed to be the guide on the side. So in other words, if you had an idea, I want to make sure your idea was public, right? If you shared something with me, I'd say, oh, did you all hear the idea of, what's her name? Of Megan? Did you hear Megan's idea? What do you think about that? You know, Megan, did you talk to Lucas? Lucas does this differently. Or is it the same? Can you help me? I'm confused. I was confused a lot whenever I was doing an intervention. I was saying, I'm so confused, you know. And then they wouldn't believe me. They said, she's not going to tell you. She's going to tell you she's confused. You know, kids are pretty smart, right? So, what did the teacher wanted to make multiple representations visible, wanted to encourage student collaboration, wanted to facilitate connections, wanted to promote argumentation, wanted to encourage generalization when it seemed possible. So Phyllis, this is Phyllis Cipriani, these were her research questions, for example, and they're parallel to ours, but you see they're really, it's qualitative case study work now. Follow the difference? Qualitative case study. And it goes on. So what changes, if any, can be identified at teachers' beliefs about learning or teaching. So they track the actual beliefs. They actually track everything. They track the reasoning. They track where this went. It's just a beautiful piece of work. They defined, you know, terms of what's the intervention. When we use the word teachers, who are they? Who's the instructor? Who are the research students? Who are the current students? Because we keep talking about students and talk about teachers. So they were very clear on this. And the different cycles and what each cycle was about. And they talked about the data collection and when the online discussions were there, et cetera. There was one other added thing for this cohort. They did a final project. And the final project was just sort of their putting together something for a portfolio, right, of what they kind of want to share about what they've done in the course. And so they had samples of student work, and they had written about it. A lot of these portfolios became the basis for their master's papers, the students who came in later for a degree. It was the raw data and so forth. So they did have that. And there were interviews. The facilitator interviewed the instructor a few times, so those interviews were also part of the data. Lots of data sources, right? Can you imagine the amount of data here for a one-semester course? They had to come up with their teacher reasoning strategies framework. You know, what were they going to be noticing here, and what were they going to be coding for, what kind of representations, what kind of arguments they were going to code for, whether they were complete or whether they were partial, whether or not they worked on this convincing, not convincing. We actually dropped that in our own analysis because it was sort of vague, but they kept the convincing, not convincing part of it. You get the idea. They looked at instructor moves. They used a lot of the Herbal-Eisenman framework and some others to look at instructor moves, pedagogical practices. They coded for all of this. These three students were on the phone every week for a couple of hours because I had another graduate student there taking notes and reporting to me because I said, tell me when you want me to join you. I didn't want to get in the way. But when you want me to be there, I'll come, but I still want to know what's going on. You want to know what's going on.
Always.
So here we go. So, and this is how they coded in the inventory, and they grouped the questions in different categories themselves. This was these three cohort groups: expectations, mathematical discourse, concepts and procedures, manipulative, student and teacher roles, etc. The reasoning analysis, again, heuristic strategies, controlling for variable. I don't want to bore you with all this because this is all written about, and you can look at the dissertation. But according to Phyllis, some of the emerging themes that came up was that change in expectations of students' abilities, particularly with special ed students. There were quite a few special ed teachers here, and that is important. That's really important. And teachers' growth regarding questioning techniques. So, some example. So as an initial belief, one teacher said, I gave my 7th grade students that are in a resource room a 5th grade pretest and realized they are even lower than I expected. That's the beginning. Teacher comes in with, like, these 7th graders are lower, I gave them a 5th grade, right? And then this teacher says, it bothered me that I had some of the same reasoning arguments that students made. I'd like to think that I'm a little bit more advanced. She just said that in the beginning. That's a start, right? Recognizing, that maybe I need to learn more, right? So this teacher would say, this is something that I didn't think of at first, so I didn't think they would either. Doesn't that happen a lot? I didn't think of this, so I don't think my students would think of it, right? They showed me that students with low functioning levels are still able to reason at high levels if given time and appropriate resources. It's helped me to try not to limit my students when giving assignments. The example of a growth. Isn't that nice? You kind of see that. Even though they are special education students, I should not set my expectations of their abilities low. I've learned that I can challenge them and that they can surprise me and rise to that challenge. Another teacher reported that she questioned students more instead of leading them toward an answer. The more I question my students, the better they understand the math they're given. I was much better at questioning my students throughout the 3rd task, the 3rd iteration. The teacher's noticing, his own improvement over the 3rd. The task gave me the opportunity to change my teaching and questioning techniques, found myself to be asking more thought-provoking questions, and doing a lot less leading to the right answer. That's what we want, right? And that's kind of encouraging. Another one reported that she questioned students more instead of leading them. That's the same one. I was much better at questioning throughout the entire 3rd task. The task gave me the opportunity to change my teaching. I think I repeated some of these. I like this one. I then knew that each and every student has the capacity to invent or express their mathematical uniqueness in ways in which I would not want to limit. I knew then that I must remove myself. I've got to pull away. I can't just keep. So, you see these comments, you see what they write, and you trace their change in beliefs, and you can see, what they're noticing that's important. Being a good questioner is definitely a skill that can be developed, but it takes practice and thought. Herb Ginsberg wrote a book on questioning, and he said you have to learn how to interview and question every day for a year before you get good at it. I believe that. The course is making me more aware of how I question my students. I need to make sure I am not asking leading questions. My idea of what a competent answer to a word problem has changed over this course. Not just look at the answer, look at how your movement towards an answer. What's your growth looking like? I learned how important a clearly developed explanation is in supporting written work, to ask the proper questions, provide a supportive environment. So you can see the expectations, are documented pretty much. There's lots of this in the actual dissertation. And I go back to, our video Mosaic Collaborative. This is our collection. www.videomosaic.org. This is our tool. You can go there, there's a tutorial, and it will give you, in little modules, instructions on how to make an analytic. And you have extensive metadata in a search tool. This is algebra. You might want to look at open sentence with 2 variables or 1 variables. You might want to look at, problem solving and reasoning. It tells you who the student participants are. You can search by student if you want. You can search by grade level. You can search by instructor. This set of algebra ones are the late Bob Davis. They're absolutely amazing. If you haven't looked at the algebra strand and you teach algebra, you should absolutely look at them. Or if you're teaching elementary school teachers to do early algebra, you should look at Bob Davis's approach. It's really lovely. So a little bit about, the workspace for the analytic tool and how to search, how to create an event, so you can actually, cut and paste there yourself. You have an event timeline. You get a chance to write an overall description of your video narrative, and then you write very explicit event descriptions. And this is what it sort of looks like. If you play it, it's like a little story, a video narrative. You can, make it long, you can make it short, you can make the whole thing 5 minutes, you could make it 15 minutes. Try not to make it longer than that.
for sure.
And then you could share it, and you could create a hyperlink, right? And you could get it published. You can submit it for publication, and I'm told it's supposed to be there as long as Rutgers is, or at least 50 years, they say. And it counts as a publication, and you can write a paper with your analytic that you submit somewhere. And that's kind of nice. Whether it's a practitioner journal, or you want to show, you want to make a point about something, you want teachers to pay attention to something, whatever it is. And so that's exciting. So there we go. A couple of my favorite ones. We have over 50 published VMC analytics. I think there are more than that. Diverse topics. We have a paper published in the Journal of Math Behavior on language and math learning that was done by Louise Wilkinson, who was our former dean, distinguished professor at Syracuse University, with Robert Ziegler. They joined forces on doing a case study of Ariel over a couple of years, whose language, his initial language is thises and that's and here and there, and then he talks about x-intercepts and slopes and whatever, and it's very interesting. Longitudinal, there's a paper that goes with it, was published this year actually. Counts are available. Got to fill out a code of conduct. So if you are not cleared for IRB, you have to say you're going to be a good citizen and not use this in any inappropriate way, and we give you an account. You have the option for publication. Look for our new book that's coming out soon, which is on the fraction study and reasoning, and look for our book on the spring of publication. This work, again, as I said, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to do this work. No one person can do work like this. You need teams and teams. So the teams are my many colleagues, and the teams were many, many graduate students and doctoral students who put in unrelentless hours and still continue to work and publish as they are the university positions and collaborate together. And so those are my views.